Hi, welcome to DARPL's third Senior Leader Professional Learning module. My name is Rachel Clarke and I am the founder and director of Apex Educate, which is an anti-racist consultancy. It works with schools, it works with organisations, it works with early years spaces and colleges too, to support leaders, staff, families and learners on their anti-racist journey. Looking at the cartoon on the right, it says, what's the matter? It's the same distance. It's important we reflect on the fact that all of us have varied lived experiences because of the identity markers we have. And our identity markers intersect. That mean that we interact with society in a certain way, and society interacts and has specific expectations on us. And it's only when we look at what these identity markers are, can we and do we have the important opportunity to see and notice the barriers that exist, to best consider how we remove them. So who am I? As I've already explained, I'm Rachel Clarke. Until a few years ago, I was a deputy head teacher of a large London primary school. In northwest London, in Brent, a very diverse area in terms of economics, in terms of cultures, in terms of religions. And I had a great time there. But I was called away from there because the demands for this professional learning and this development work started to grow. I am the daughter of Elaine Clarke, who was a very successful head teacher in northwest London as well, and the granddaughter of Betty Campbell, MBE, who you can see in the picture on the right of your screen. And as a family, we felt very fortunate and blessed to attend her statue unveiling and to be really woven through that whole process of her statue being developed and then shared on that momentous day in 2021. So talking about race equity and having this woven through my very core is part of the reason why I've moved into focusing on this work and developing the knowledge and skill set of others too. Being anti-racist has got to be seen as a way of being rather than a label to wear. It's definitely something my grandmother did with the school that she led, Mount Stuart, which is still there and still thriving, but also within her local community. If you haven't had an opportunity to see her statue, please do check it out. There's also a Betty Campbell resource that I have developed with a whole lot of curriculum development for learners and for staff as well. So if you're considering how to use her history to support the enrichment of your curriculum, then please do reach out and make contact because it's immersive, which learners do enjoy. But what she did so successfully is she made sure that the ecosystem of learning was one that was balanced, that was equitable, that reflected others, that reflected selves, that really did strengthen the core of all young people and people within her community. So much so that when they left, they felt that they were far more equipped to thrive in spaces that were not economically diverse, racially diverse, or culturally diverse. One of the things I remember my grandmother saying to me was, Rachel, remember, you are no better than anyone else, but you are certainly no worse. And it's that has really stuck with me. I walk into rooms and people do stare. I go into spaces and I am the only face that looks like mine, one that's racialized as black and one that is female. And whilst my grandmother did lots of great, wonderful, successful actions, one of her big problems and issues was the fact that when she was in head teacher meetings, she was the only person that looked like her. Again, racialized as black and female. And whilst the statue is a great point of achievement and a great measure of the wonderful work Wales has done and continues to do. Actually, in this year of 2026, she would still be the only one that looks like her in a room. And so, yes, she is Wales's first Black head teacher of African and Caribbean descent. She would still be the only one. So celebration is great and wonderful and well deserved, but we can't see her statue as a full stop. We've got to see that as a comma, a marker of what can be achieved and what we can do as leaders to ensure that more opportunity is given for others like her to move through the system. So the aims for this professional learning are to deepen an understanding of the importance of anti-racist leadership, to be clear on the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist, to reflect on the development of anti-racist practice and understanding, to consider how to support colleagues to be supportive of your anti-racist drive, and to review your action plan and to consider what potentially could be adjusted, added, or tweaked to make it stronger. And I've popped at the bottom of the screen there, anti-racist leadership requires intentional action to challenge inequity, not simply centering neutrality. Yes, we are leaders within education where we cannot lean any way in terms of political affiliation. But I want us to understand that anti-racism is not a political act. Anti-racism is about justice. And it's really important that we remember that because sometimes in our drive to be neutral, we can leave behind anti-racism. As we move through this professional learning session, I'm hoping that you pause to carry out the reflections. I will deliberately pause to support you to do that because it's important that that reflection is carried out as that's a very important part of this work. So I have a quote here about courage. Courage doesn't mean you don't get afraid. Courage means you don't let fear stop you. Talking about race and racism can be the most difficult thing we do as humans in Britain. It's difficult, it's messy, it's sticky, it's tricky. Sometimes we don't find we have the words to use because as a country, as a nation, we haven't spoken about race as fully and as openly as we should have before. There are many different books and podcasts that you can listen to develop your knowledge and understanding, and also to provide you with tools so you feel more equipped to have the conversation and more of an understanding as to the words that should be used today. But there's a reflective tool on the right of the screen. It is absolutely fine to be worried, to be slightly nervous when carrying out these conversations, but it's important that we break through that because our levels of discomfort cannot be centered so much that we then avoid having conversations about race and racism because racism happens in schools. Schools, whilst in isolation, are wonderful spaces where leaders, in the main, the vast majority, really do strive to centre all learners at the heart of curriculum considerations and decisions, at the heart of any decision that's carried out. Actually, we'd be silly to think that racism doesn't exist in our schools. I know the Wales Children's Commissioner carried out a report a couple of years back and highlighted that racism does happen in schools in Wales. It's not does it happen or not, it's when it happens, are we equipped and ready to hear about it in order to make it best for all learners moving forward. So being uncomfortable talking about race is completely normal and fine and acceptable. Sticking with it is what courage is where courage steps in and where courage is needed. So this tool that you can see on the right hand of your screen that I did not develop myself is called Becoming Anti-Racist, and it's broadly split into 3 zones: the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growth zone. I want you to have a look at it, and I want you to do 2 things. I'd like you to reflect on where you feel you sit personally, and then I'd like you to consider where your school sits. Okay, and you might well be in lots of different places for various aspects, and that's absolutely fine. But it is important that this reflection is carried out. I'm hoping as you move through the various professional learning opportunities that you engage with over time, you feel that you become more confident personally, but also as a school and leading a school, your school is in a more developed state as well. So press pause here, have a think, take 15 minutes or so to think about you as an individual, but also then as your school. Where does your school sit? Because that helps you to reflect on further professional learning that your school, but also your leadership team may well need to carry out. Okay, further reflection. I'd like us to consider where we sit in terms of these three broad areas, thinking about our vision, moral purpose, and strategic direction, thinking about leadership behaviour and modelling, and thinking about governance and accountability. So there are a series of questions here. These questions you might well want to reflect on with other members of your leadership team, whether we're thinking about your middle leaders in the school or whether you're just thinking about your senior leaders and your governors. But it is important to consider, because if we don't start thinking fairly strategically about where we sit, it is hard to pinpoint the work that needs to be done around policy potentially, or around where staff have seen me as a leader model courageous conversations, or if we're thinking about governance and accountability, how race equity is fed through how governors hold us to account through their questioning. So you might want to do this now. You might want to take this back to various leadership teams and do this together. But these are very important questions to help steer where you are as a school. So I referred earlier on to my grandmother's style. I referred earlier on to her thinking process and her ambition, not just for her learners, not just for her families, but actually for her community. And many schools are labelled community schools and see themselves as community schools. But what we have to do is reflect on how much we actually interact with the community. Because of various reasons, many staff do not live in the community that the school serves within. So staff drive in, work really, really hard, work, and then go home somewhere else to a different geographical space. And if we don't think about how often we interact with members of the community outside of the school day and outside of that geographical space of the school, we might not be really, really fulfilling what we intend to, but also we might be losing the opportunity to develop real, strong, authentic relationship with people who carry out various roles within that very community. And that's something my grandmother did. She was very passionate about her school being a community school, and her living within that community, I guess, made it a lot simpler for her to live out those ambitions beyond the school gates. It's important we understand that leadership shapes culture, curriculum, policy, and therefore the wider opportunity for all learners to thrive. And if we think about learners at the heart of it, at the heart of this ecosystem, the micro system, we've then got the meso system outside. We've then got the macro system, and then we've got that wider chrono system, that wider societal interaction that our learners do face. But we sit fairly close to their micro system. So what we do and the potential we have is humongous. And we cannot underestimate that we will have and do have such a huge impact on how learners see themselves. And that feeds into how confident learners become in thinking that they can be people who shape decisions across wider society as they grow up. So it's important that we understand our place, but also our responsibility. Sometimes we don't have the opportunity to reflect on the power of our authority as leaders within the schools that we have. But there's lots of opportunity to directly affect change. Yes, we have pressures as leaders, and the school day is never quite long enough, and the pressures from government always seem to be there, or from local authorities or academy trusts and chains. Yes, all of that is true. However, if we take a moment to pause, we have such hope and such opportunity to make and be that great difference for our learners. And quite frankly, it's what our learners deserve. They deserve the clarity of us as leaders being clear about what our moral purpose is, where our values lay, and how we do commit to making sure these are reflected in our curriculum, in our policies, and in our overall school cultures. So, more reflection for you as a leader now. I want you to consider, when did you first notice your own racial identity in a leadership space? Have you ever experienced racial privilege, and when did you recognise that? Have you ever felt racially marginalised in a professional setting? How does your racial identity shape how others perceive your authority? And when did you first feel discomfort discussing race as a leader? Have you ever discussed race as a leader with other leaders or colleagues? It's important these reflection moments are welcomed despite the discomfort they might well cause, because I know, speaking from my own experience as a leader of a school, feeling as if others have perceived my level of authority differently because of my racialized identity is definitely correct. If there have been new families that have joined the school, new children who've joined the school, new staff who've joined the school, seeing me as a deputy head teacher and at times being an acting head, there have been different perceptions. So I want you to reflect on how race has shown up in your leadership and how comfortable you have been in discussing this. That reflection will help us move on to thinking and considering what non-racist leadership mainly looks like versus an anti-racist leadership stance. So if we think about the various leadership dimensions, which is that first column, and then the next column in the middle is a non-racist leadership stance, and the final column is an anti-racist leadership stance. And I'm only going to pick out a couple because you can read the rest for yourself and pause accordingly. But if we think about a policy approach, the second core stance, a non-racist action would be that there's equality and diversity policies. An anti-racist action would be that there are race equity audits being carried out, there are behaviour reviews, recruitment and safeguarding systems are audited for racial bias, because we know that that does show up. And we know it shows up, potentially not in our own schools, but we have had other cases where that has happened. And so those children, those learners who come from African or Caribbean background, heritage and descent, we know that the national statistics are they are far more likely to be excluded or receive a fixed term exclusion in schools. And that feeds into the concept of adultification, where Black and brown children are often assumed to be older than they are, and therefore more culpable for their actions they become, and therefore the harsher the sanction that goes in. We haven't been trained in this way to know about all of these different concepts. Nonetheless, those behaviours can be there because of this implicit bias that we have from being socialised here. So that's one example. And another on the following slide is thinking about our own accountability as leaders. That second one from the top there, where we might well think that the responsibility to deal with this really does sit with a race equality lead or with HR. However, if we ourselves as leaders are being anti-racist actively, then we are embedding anti-racism within our performance management, within our conversations, and we have an oversight of what is going on. I'm not saying that we dismiss the inclusion of HR support. Absolutely, we should. But what we shouldn't be doing is saying it's all the responsibility of someone else and bypassing our own accountability, therefore, to act. So I want you to take 5-10 minutes to have a look at the 2 slides, have a look at the different dimensions. I want you to think about, for those dimensions, how anti-racist your school is and your leadership action is, and how non-racist it is. Because being non-racist means that we are passive and that we are not challenging as we should potentially because we're not noticing. We might say things like, well, that's just the way we do things here and that's the way we've always done it. What we've got to do is start noticing that that's not good enough. If we want these unequitable systems to be maintained, then we just carry on doing the same as we've always done. If we'd like them to start changing to be more equitable, then we've got to start behaving differently. So I'd like you to have a 5-10 minute comfort break. We've done lots of thinking, lots of listening. Hopefully you've carried out lots of conversation and talking. Take a 5-10 minute break and then come back to the deck. Okay, I hope your break was welcomed and you enjoyed it, whatever you did. This is a moving GIF that helps us to understand the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist. I like using it because sometimes the difference between the two is so slight, it's difficult or challenging to fully grasp. So if we have a look at the column on the left, actively racist people spend a lot of energy trying to get to that space of social inequity, racial injustice. If we visualize that moving pavement there, with the end point of it being social injustice and racial inequity, and we believe in the superiority of races, actively racist people spend a lot of energy moving along that pathway in that direction. And I think, although those people exist, I think that they are few and far between. I still maintain that most people do not intend to cause any racial hurt or harm, do not strive for racial injustice. However, they stand still and they do nothing about the systems that do exist that produce these inequitable outcomes because of their design. And so standing still doing nothing means, oh yeah, we still get to the same point. It might just take a bit longer. Whereas anti-racist people, they see that system, they see that pathway, they're not happy about it, and so they actively and proactively work against it. Now, this proactive, active action does not need to be a big protest. It doesn't need to be the painting of banners, not at all. Anti-racism happens in small steps. It happens through noticing, it happens through auditing, it happens through conversation, through carrying out professional learning, as you all are. So we might feel that anti-racism has to be this big statement piece that happens. But anti-racism begins with us noticing as leaders and us then carrying out these small steps that will lead to change over time. But it can seem hard at times, particularly when it feels like you as a leader have one ambition for the school and maybe others are not ready yet for that. And so it's down to us as leaders to think about how we are helping people to move in the direction of the vision that we have laid forth, and the supports that we put in. So as leaders, it's really important that we have an understanding of what anti-racist leadership looks like, because unfortunately, young people do experience racism in schools, in our nurseries and early years childcare and play settings, within our college spaces, within universities, because schools are microcosms and learning spaces are microcosms of wider society. It's important that we hear about some of the experiences that young people do have. And I've referenced earlier on the Wales's Children's Commissioner's report about racism within Welsh schools and settings. So please do read that. But sometimes it's also nice to hear from young people. After we've watched this, I want you to reflect on the questions to the right of the YouTube clip, and the reference of it is also on the screen, which should help you to go back at a later point if you did want to do this with staff as well.
Last year, we spoke to British Chinese children who told us they were being bullied because the pandemic began in China. Well, the latest figures show racism towards that community has more than doubled since then. So we asked them about their experiences.
Since the virus started in the UK, the racist comments have gotten worse because I've experienced them more and more times. When I was out running with my mum, there was these like teenagers in a car and they were swearing at us because we were Chinese.
The virus is just making the comments worse.
I've had like more fear, I guess. Like walking around my school grounds and walking around the streets, being called like coronavirus or go back to China because of my Chinese race. So I'm definitely more scared than before.
I see videos promoting racism and videos showing racist attacks against Asian people, which makes me feel quite uncomfortable and scared that similar things could happen to me.
When I went back to school after lockdown, people said more offensive things about Asians. If there wasn't the coronavirus, I don't think they would have said anything about the Chinese.
At the start of the pandemic, they were like saying, oh, she's contagious, stay away from her. I feel a bit frustrated that we're still talking about it a year later.
This guy who kept on saying that like in China we ate bats until I started bursting out crying. I just find that really offensive and racist.
I always question myself, why did they do that? Like, I really don't like them saying mean things to Asian people. It makes me feel very sad because people know that it started in Wuhan, but it's not the Chinese fault. Everybody's really struggling, they're all panicking, they want the virus to stop, and sometimes people just want someone to blame it on.
We've been quite privileged and quite lucky to not be in like the situation of others where people have been subject to mean comments.
To fix the problem, I would like the government to give the Chinese more and more protection.
And the police need to definitely do more better.
I feel like we need to remember the British values a bit more. So I've drawn this picture. You've got tolerance for different cultures and religion. I feel like we don't talk about these values enough in our daily lives.
Even if to you it feels like a joke and you're just playing around and just saying jokes for the fun of it, to the person you're directing it to, they're feeling something very different.
If you were like me and you got the nasty comments, would you like it?
Now, if you want to find out more about this story or what the government say they're doing about it, then head over to the Newsroom website. And if you are upset by what you've heard, you can get loads of advice and help there as well.
So I think that clip does sum up what the experiences have been for people, and if we shift the context, still are for some people. Consider what your reflections are about those young people's experiences. Does anything about what they've said surprise you? Why? If so, why not? If not, and how does the Welsh curriculum attempt to ensure this doesn't happen? More specifically, what are you doing at your school to ensure this doesn't happen? We're outside of that stage and time of coronavirus, but there are other things happening on our global stage that mean that conversations have the same message and the same themes, but just applied to different people, perhaps. So have a discussion 5 or 10 minutes long and share your thoughts together. So when racism happens within our schools, what do we do? Where do we go for support? And do all members of staff, irrespective of role carried out, that all members of staff know what to do? Racism needs to be considered as a safeguarding issue because it is. It affects how young people feel about themselves. It affects people physically. It affects people mentally. And it really can impede how well learners thrive within settings and spaces. So we need to consider it as such. And because of that, we know that all members of staff need to have a clear procedure to follow. If we're thinking about disclosures within any of the sectors of child protection and categories of child protection, 99.99999 members of staff know what to do if a young person discloses something, because we have annual training, it's a statutory requirement, and we make sure that staff do know what to do because we do take the safeguarding of learners seriously. Racism needs to be seen under that umbrella. And as such, there are procedures that we can follow to support us and to know that we're doing best by the young people involved. Now, I myself from Apex Educate, alongside Show Racism the Red Card, put together the DARPL publication called Eradicate Racism in Learning Organisations. There's a whole lot of guidance there. It is free to download, it is free to access, and it provides great clarity over what to do when a disclosure is made. And I think the more systematic we can be about this and the more we can take out what we individually personally think, the better off everyone will be. Because a young person says something has happened to them that is racist, it doesn't mean that we as leaders say, yes, it is racism, but it does mean that we take it seriously and we treat it as a racist incident and investigate it as such. The outcome will be whatever the outcome is. However, centering that young person and making sure that we check back in with them is crucial. In schools and learning spaces, we have been taught about racism in discrete, isolated incidents. So we refer to them as racist incidents. And what that does is it stops us from being able to understand how one incident can happen 1 year. If it happens again, 10 years later, 5 years later, it might well trigger how we felt that first time it happened. And not only that, that ripple effect can be felt within families, so crossing generations worth of experience. And we've got to centre the voices of that young person reporting, and we've got to go and check back in with them later on after the event. And making sure that we've got those processes in place is really, really important. So on your screen, you can see a 10-step. This is what you can do in your schools if you do not have that guidance already there. And as I said, take some time to read it, take some time to digest it, and use it as a learning opportunity for your staff as well. So there's clarity over what to do when racism is either witnessed or racism is disclosed to adults. Lots of people are unsure about the words to use when they hear racism, particularly when they hear it from adults in staff rooms, in classrooms, where there might not be learners present. Sometimes racism manifests about families or lower expectations or referring to what children look like and making derogatory comments that way. And as adults, and particularly as leaders, we have to remember that if we just let those comments fly past us, we are non-verbally signalling that we accept them, even though internally we might be wrestling with what to say and how to say it. So on your screen, there are some starters that might well support those sorts of conversations. So that was not necessary, or is the person's race relevant to your story? I'm sorry, what? And getting people to re-explain, sometimes given another option for people to repeat what they've said is enough for people to realise what they've said is wrong. So there are different ways we can interrupt and respond to racist incidents and comments that are made. There was a lot in that section, so please do take a well-earned break and jump back into the deck where we think about how to bring staff along this journey with us. So leading anti-racism is really, really important. It's important that we are seen as the person who creates that change, who leads that change, but we've got to bring others with us. We know that sometimes leadership can be a very lonely space and place to be. And there's a lot we can learn from geese. Geese have adopted a very, very purposeful and powerful leadership style. And there are different methods and lessons we can learn from them. One that's around shared direction and having a collective purpose. The second around rotating that leadership responsibility and making sure that we distribute leadership responsibility. And that third one there that you can see on the screen, encouraging others and having an approach of collective care and shared responsibility that takes care of others. Now, it might seem a little bit strange as to why we're looking at geese and a video about geese to support us to think about how we can bring others with us. But the questions on your screen, I'm hoping that you will find incredibly purposeful to help you reflect on your school structure, your leadership style, and how you adopt that buy-in from others. I'm going to press play. I'm going to watch this short video. And then we will resume on the other side, thinking about how we can move forward.
Great leaders don't set out to be a leader. They set out to make a difference. It's never about the role, always about the goal. Here's the 7 lessons we can learn from the geese. Number 1, sharing a common goal. As each goose flaps its wings, it creates uplift and aerodynamics orientation that reduces air friction for the birds that follow. By flying in a V formation, the whole flock achieves a 70% greater flying range than if each bird flew alone. Lesson: people who share a common direction and goal can get where they are going quicker and with less effort because they benefit from the momentum of the group moving around them. Make sure your team is aligned towards a common goal. Number 2, increasing visibility. Flying in a V formation increases the visibility as every goose can see what's happening in front of them. The lesson here is to make our organizations visible in both org chart directions. Having top-down visibility enables leaders to stay connected with the edges of the organization to make better informed decisions. Bottom-up visibility enables teams to see the bigger picture, engages them, and empowers them to better align themselves with the organizational objectives. If we have as much sense as a goose, we will stay in formation, joining those heading in the direction we want to go. The sense of community emerges with a willingness to work as a team. Not only is it more efficient, the flock together has better visibility of its surroundings and is more visible as a collective. Number 3, having humility to seek help. When a goose falls out of formation, it suddenly feels the friction of flying alone. It then quickly adjusts its mistake and moves back into the formation to take advantage of the lifting power of the bird immediately in front of it. Lesson: be humble to admit the challenges we face and to seek help as soon as we get stuck. This humility will enable you and your team to move faster and achieve more. If we have the sense of a goose, we will openly and confidently acknowledge when we need help and gratefully accept the support that is offered, and will fly harder to stay up with the flock so we can all go longer distances with ease. Number 4, empowering others to lead. When the lead goose in the front gets tired, it rotates back into the formation and allows another goose to take the leadership position. Lesson: empower others to also lead. Micromanaging and keeping tight control will burn you out. It will also disengage and demotivate others around you. People have unique skills, capabilities, and gifts to offer. Give them autonomy, trust, and a chance to shine, and you will be surprised with the outcomes. Number 5, always recognizing great work. The geese honk to recognize each other and encourage those up front to keep up their speed. Lesson: make sure we praise people and give them the recognition they deserve. Lack of recognition is one of the main reasons team members are unsatisfied at work and quit. It's very common for people's efforts to go unnoticed by their peers in a busy and fast-moving work environment. However, remembering to constantly provide recognition and encouragement is vital, and it keeps teams motivated to achieve their goals. Number 6, offering support in challenging times. When a goose gets sick or wounded, 2 geese drop out of the formation and follow it down to help and protect it. They stay with it until it dies or is able to fly again. Then, they launch out with another formation or catch up with the flock. Lesson: standing by each other in difficult times. It's easy to always be part of winning teams, but when things get difficult and people are facing challenges, that's when your teammates need you the most. If we have the sense of a goose, we will stand by each other when things get rough, and we will willingly take the support and guidance that's an offer. Number 7, staying committed to core values and purpose. The geese migration routes never vary. They use the same route year after year. Even when the flock members change, the young learn the route from their parents. In the spring, they will go back to the spot where they were born. Lesson: stay true to our core values and purpose. Strategies, tactics, and products may change in order for an organization to remain agile, but great companies always stick to their core purpose and values and preserve them with vigor. If we have the sense of a goose, we will recover and regroup and resume formation with the greater team headed in the direction that we want to go, and we will stick with the plan until we succeed. Thanks for watching this video. Share and subscribe for more amazing inspiration.
So hopefully you found those questions on your leadership style and the questions to help your reflection about how you're bringing colleagues with you on this journey useful. It's a really good video to potentially show with various groups of leader within your school to get them to consider how they're empowering others to achieve the aims and the vision that you've set out. This slide you can see really does exemplify how difficult it can be sometimes to get a deep understanding of how racism may well present and show up in our learning spaces, in our organisation, because often we can focus on what's seen, what's clearly visible. whether that's a slur that's used or other behaviours or actions that are carried out. But what we need to get to the bottom of is what's hidden, what's beneath the water's surface in terms of people's values, assumptions, people's beliefs, people's mindsets, because it's only then will we get to the root causes, and we can then try to rework things and encourage people to shift those values to better align with the school's intentions. And sometimes that can present in affinity bias without us even realizing it. We can start appointing people directly in our own image. So if we have a look at that cartoon at the bottom, it says, "Frankly, Dinsdale, we like the look of you." There's lots of research now to support the fact that people with non-anglicised sounding names do not get as far through recruitment processes as they should, because people's bias shows up. It presents the assumptions that are linked very much to what somebody's name is, how somebody looks, has been charted and documented now. And so we've got to think as leaders about our own recruitment processes and the opportunities we also give to learners to see themselves and others reflected in the curriculum. So right from a young age, children are not thinking that only certain people carry out certain specific roles. And we do this really well in schools with regards to gender. We've also got to make conscious and deliberate efforts with regards to race as well. So I'd like you now to reflect on this case study, this scenario, thinking about the actions you would or could carry out. How would you respond? Or if this actual scenario has happened to you in your school, how did you respond? So the scenario is thus: your school runs a successful Black History Month each October. Assemblies are well attended and pupils enjoy the activities. However, a parent emails in saying, "Why does my daughter only learn about Black contributions in October? Why is the rest of the curriculum still centred on white European narratives?" Some staff privately feel this is an unfair criticism, and others feel quite quietly uncomfortable about it. As a leader, we might respond in defence, with surprise, or in a belief that this tokenistic celebration on its own is enough. As a team, whether that's yourself as the head teacher or principal, and a deputy head teacher, or as a wider leadership team, however you'd like. But I really want you to discuss this scenario, because we might rush to defend, oh, but we had great intentions and also it was incredibly successful, so what's the problem? But we've got to dig beneath that surface a little bit. We've got to interrogate it a bit. So there are some questions I'd like you to consider. Number one, is this feedback an attack or an opportunity? Number two, what does our curriculum look like in November, March, July, other times of the year? Number three, whose knowledge is normalised as standard? And by default, therefore, whose knowledge is othered? Number four, are we adding diversity or are we transforming knowledge structures in our curriculum? Number five, what would sustained curriculum reform require from us as leaders? So what do we need to do in order to support curriculum adjustments to be made? Have a conversation and then come back to the deck. Hopefully that was really useful, and DARPL is carrying out some great work around curriculum. I also support different schools and learning spaces with curriculum development. So again, if you have thought about what to do next or what your next steps should be, or you'd like a conversation further about curriculum, please do reach out. So the University of Melbourne is a site I have never been to, but I really like their action plan. I like the strategic thinking. I like the fact that there are clear goals at the top with the vision above that. that there are specific outcomes against each goal, that we're thinking about how it links to strategic priorities and the key enablers at the bottom. Now, your plan probably doesn't look anything like this. Everybody knows about the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. Everybody knows about the different requirements and the different aims, particularly around that education part of it, which is great. Everybody has a strategic equality plan in their schools and spaces. So we're quite familiar in learning organisations in Wales with the need for strategic action. But I like this example. It has nothing to do with the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan and is not linked to it. But I like it because of how visual it is. I'm wondering for you how all staff are clear about your anti-racism priorities, the actions your school, I'm sure, has already carried out or is committed to carrying out. Because if we don't get this clear in a visual, sometimes we as leaders can hold on to those documents and we know what we're doing, but it can stunt the communication of the hard work we are putting in to achieve this aim. So if possible, I'd like you to consider your own action plan. And I'd like you to think about how visual you've made it for all stakeholders, but particularly for staff who are needing to drive this with you. I want you to think about putting together a visual and then consider these questions. How are you going to meet your objectives? Are there any aspects of your action plan that you've already got written down that are quite a high risk? And what can be done to mitigate that? And I want you to think about risk in various ways. One of those ways we don't think about enough in schools is the risk of somebody getting hold of this and using it as a way to target your school quite negatively. So I'm thinking about trolling and I'm thinking about the use of social media, because sometimes we don't think along these lines because we know that this is about all children feeling that sense of belonging and us as staff and as leaders trying to do all that we can to foster that sense. Sometimes what we do can be taken, misunderstood, and that can lead to quite a negative experience online. So we've got to start thinking about risk in those ways too. Who can you call on for support? And what does success look like? So this is the time for you to come together, look at that Melbourne visual example, think about your own actions that you've already planned for to carry out. Some of you have already done this work for a few years now, which is great. But I want you to then think about risk and how you can weave that through what you're doing and the considerations you are making. Because as much as this is positive and we are moving in this direction and Wales is moving in this direction, some people might misconstrue what this is actually about. So we've got to plan quite carefully for it. So I'd like you to pull up your action plan that you currently have. Think about how Melbourne University have presented theirs. Think about the presentation of yours and also these questions here, and think about making those tweets accordingly.
If you would like to continue your anti-racist professional learning journey with DARPL, please consider joining our Enhanced Leadership series. This is a series of 6 professional learning days with a combination of in-person and virtual learning. We run 2 cohorts each academic year, with cohorts in North and South Wales each time. To register, please click the link on the slide or visit the DARPL website for more information. If you would like continued support and guidance for your learning organisation, please consider joining the DARPL Advocacy Network. Each associated learning organisation is able to request bespoke professional learning which can be linked to their school improvement or development plans to support them to become anti-racist learning organisations. For more information on becoming a DAN school, please click the link and complete the inquiry form.
So finally, I'd like to say a huge diolch yn fawr. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time, your hearts, your minds, your willingness to do this work and listen, because it is valued and valuable. You will and are making a difference to so many young people in so many ways that you don't yet know, but you are. Stay committed, stay focused, remember the lessons of the geese, and my QR code for Apex Educate is there on the screen for you. Please do reach out, get in touch. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.